Hey everyone, Ryan here at Etrailer. Today on our 2016 Chevy Silverado 1500, we're going to be showing you how to install the airlift, load lifter, air helper springs for the rear axle. Before we do that though, let's take a moment, check these out, and see if they're going to work for you. Underneath the truck, this is what your air suspension can look like once it's installed. And essentially, these are just going to replace your factory style jounce bumpers, which these jounce bumpers really don't do much for extra support. They're really just there to help prevent the suspension from bottoming out. And so having an air spring in here is going to give you that extra support. And so these are going to be able to handle up to 5,000 pounds. Keep in mind though, that's not going to increase your Silverado's weight carrying capacity. You know, at 5K is just what these are going to be able to handle. There are quite a few suspension enhancements available for the Silverado, and when it comes to an air spring, the benefit to these is that they're going to be adjustable. All right, so these are going to be in the range from 5 to 100 psi. Usually most people find themselves kind of in the middle as far as the pressure goes, but having that adjustability is really going to let you dial in and fine-tune your ride depending on what you're hauling. So if you tend to tow a lot of different trailers, a lot of different weights, these are probably going to be ideal for you. As compared to some of the other suspension enhancements, some of them you just kind of get what you get. So for example, a Timbren or a Sumo spring, those are more or less just like a beefed up jounce bumper. And with those, you know, once they're installed, like I said, you kind of get what you get. They're not adjustable. And those can be good in situations where you don't really want to have maintenance or anything like that, because the bags are going to require some of that. Or if you just tow occasionally and just really looking for a little extra help whenever you're hauling something really heavy. And then you have stuff kind of in the middle there. So for example, the Roadmaster active suspension, I'm kind of a fan of that one. It essentially is a big leaf spring, more or less. That one is somewhat adjustable. So you can kind of find that happy medium depending on your towing situation and your towing needs. I mentioned that maintenance when it comes to air springs, and they are going to require a minimum of 5 psi all the time. So it's something you're going to have to pay attention to. If you let them go flat, essentially, you know, you can damage the bag and create an unsafe situation. And to help make maintenance easier and adjustability across the board, you can always pick up a compressor. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here in a little while, is putting this airlift one on. If that's something you're interested in, I highly recommend these airlift compressors. They're wireless. They have these really nice mounts, and they make it about as easy as it gets when it comes to setting a compressor system up. Other than that, when it comes down to it, this is a good addition to the Silverado and will help make your towing experience that much better. As far as the installation goes, really wasn't too bad. These actually fit pretty well. You know, you kind of assemble the air spring, move a couple lines and whatnot out of the way, and they kind of just drop into place more or less. So really shouldn't give you too many issues or take up a bunch of your time. But with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and get started on them now. One of the things that we like to do is a couple of tests. That way we can compare the factory suspension, see how it performs, to the suspension once we get the airbags installed. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and get some weight in the bed of the truck. With about, if I had to guess, probably close to 450, 500 pounds in the bed of the truck. And even at that weight, as you can see, it definitely made the truck squat down some. Should be a good starting point for our test here. We'll go ahead, hop in, and go for a spin. One of the first things that we're gonna do is go over some bumps. And just for a reference too, before I even put any weight in the bed of the truck, I took a blue piece of tape. You can see that from underneath the truck, and put it where the shock, the collar, meets the shock absorber, just as a reference point. So where the top of that tape started was you know, the factory ride height with nothing in it, just so we can kind of see how much our truck is squatting and what the suspension's doing. But as we go over these bumps, I like to get going over a few of them to get some energy going through the chassis here. Definitely, I don't know the best word for it, sloppy, I guess you could say. We hit the bump and the truck is kind of just bouncing all over the place. It feels like it would be porpoising really bad. So, you know, instead of kind of hitting the bump and rebounding and leveling out as I hit it, we're just all over the place. It's like we're floating almost. And usually airbags will really help with the scenario like that. They just help out that factory suspension. So curious to see once we get them on if that will be the case. We're going to do some evasive maneuvering now, at least the best of our ability here. Don't have a ton of room to do this, but we'll see what the deal is anyway. And so start making some of these turns, and usually this is where you can kind of really feel the weight a lot more. And as I'm turning, you definitely get that body roll. You know, the truck is wanting to kind of tip real heavy on one side and then almost having to overcorrect the steering to get you going back in the right direction. And like I said, this is usually where the greatest improvement is when it comes to enhancing your vehicle's suspension, at least from my experience. And not to mention too, you know, we got a decent amount of weight back there, but it's not a ton. So, you know, I could really see these effects being much worse if you had a lot more weight or a real big heavy trailer, something along those lines. Now that we have the air springs installed, I put that same amount of weight in the bed of the truck, and with about 25 pounds of air, something like that, we're able to achieve the factory ride height, which I know from that tape that I put on our shock absorber. So, you know, it's looking better already, but how it's gonna drive is a completely different story. So let's see how it does. Immediately just hopping in the truck, definitely a more comfortable ride. You know, I don't feel it squatting down and the front end wanting to point up. That's better already. And we're just gonna do the same exact thing here, going over our bumps. And even after just going over the first couple, definitely feels better. The truck, you know, it's still kind of floating around a little bit. I think that's partly due to the shocks on this truck. You know, but the airbags, as far as how they're performing, you know, we hit the bump, it starts to kind of float a little bit, and you get about one bounce, and then it kind of settles itself straight again. So I think they're definitely working as far as that goes. And even from front to back, before when you'd hit it, the back end would come way down and then kind of want to bounce up like that. It's really not the case now. As soon as I hit it, you feel it come down, but then, you know, rebound and stay there. So definitely doing a good job, and definitely made an improvement. We'll run through our lot here and do some turns like we did before. Once I come through this little clearing, get a little more aggressive and see how it does. And even just making this first turn, pretty big difference. And that's kind of what I expected. Like I said in the past, this is where I really notice a big difference. And I'm going faster than I was before and getting a lot more aggressive. And the truck feels a lot more planted. You know, you still get a little bit of body roll, but it's not, you know, out of control by any means. So, you know, when you're turning the wheel, the truck's going that way. When you're cutting it back, the truck responds really well and helps kind of keep everything centered. And overall, definitely working like they should, and should help your towing experience be a little bit better. To begin our installation, we're going to be underneath the back of our truck, and what you can do, definitely helps, is just temporarily lower and remove your spare tire. Gives you a lot more room to work. So I went ahead and did that. And what you can do now is essentially jack up the truck by the frame. So essentially what you're looking to do is increase the distance between your frame and your rear axle. We can remove our jounce bumpers now, which is this component here. And so inside, way up in there, there's a 10mm head bolt. So I just grabbed a socket and extension, and we'll pull that out. Should be able to just grab this and pop it right out. If it's really tight, sometimes you can spray it down with soapy water and use a pry bar. We'll get this out of the way and do the same thing to get the passenger side one removed. On our driver's side here, all these lines and stuff, we're going to unclip them from the frame. So it looks like we have one right here. You can just take a trim tool or a flathead screwdriver, pop that free. That way we can move it around and clear everything. And then right here as well, there's going to be another keeper. So we'll pry that out of position too. With this now free, or unclipped from the frame rather, we need to actually remove this plastic piece. These can be kind of a pain sometimes, not gonna lie. What we'll do is kind of squeeze it tight together, and then take a small screwdriver or pick, go in that opening, and essentially there's just a clip kind of holding this together. I'm just trying to apply some pressure to it. So I got it to unsnap there. And that's what was holding it in, that piece that comes down and kind of V's up. So we'll get that out of the way, and then the kit's gonna come with these clamps. We'll just put that right over it for now. We'll let this wire hang and do the same thing on the other side of our truck. Right in the middle of your differential, your e-brake cable runs along through here, and we're gonna have to relocate it a little bit. That way it'll clear the bags and everything. So this bracket, if you take a flathead screwdriver and kind of pry the cable out of the bracket, you can take a 10mm and remove the bolt holding that bracket on. We'll get rid of this. We're going to switch it out for this. Put our cable through there. You want to position it like this, that way, you know, the cable, we're raising it up essentially. Take our bolt and tighten it back down. Grab your bag, and one side of it, there's going to be 3 threaded holes. This will be the top. And you want to take a roll plate, set it on there like that, and then you're going to have your air fitting. And so with these, you get them started by hand, as tight as you can. Then you grab a 1/2 inch wrench and tighten it 1.5 turns. Grab your upper bracket now, and these are labeled left and right, left being the driver's side, right being the passenger side. So just keep that in mind when you're putting these together. But the holes in it are going to line up with the holes in the top of our bag, and you want them to go through the roll plate holes as well. Then you can take these screws, and we'll get these started. And once we have them hand tight, we'll come back with a torque wrench and tighten them down to the amount specified in the instructions, and that's where you're able to find all the torque specs. And I am using a 7/32 size Allen key to do this. Flip the spring assembly over now, and just as a reference, the air fitting is going to be closest to me. All right, and so we'll take the other roll plate, set that into position, and then the lower bracket, I'll On the back side, it's extremely difficult to see, at least ours is, but there's an arrow. You want that arrow to point towards the side opposite of our air fitting. So it'd be like that. Another way you can kind of tell too, the holes here are offset towards one side of the plate. And to me, the longer side is the side with the arrow. So that's something you can check as well, but that's gonna line up. Take the same style of screws that we used before. We'll get them started and get them torqued down. Once you have both of the air spring assemblies set up, you can take a bolt here. This is the 1.5" long one, and this big flat washer. Put it on like that. Then they give you this pull wire. Go ahead and thread that bolt onto the end of our pull wire. Take the end of the pull wire that the bolt's not attached to. This oval shaped hole here, you can put this through it, and we're trying to get it to come out of this hole here where our ABS wire originally was secured to. So pull that through. Pull the hardware through the frame. Get this to drop down, and then carefully remove the pull wire because you'll have to use it to do the same thing on the other side. Take your air spring assembly, and this is going to go in between the top of our axle and the bottom of our frame. That hole in the bracket, this bolt is going to drop through there, and then you'll put your clamp over it and tighten it down. And depending on your particular situation, how you mount up this part here on the front is really just going to depend on what you got going on. So if you do not have an in-bed hitch, what you would do is take this U-bolt. This U-bolt will drop over the frame, and of course you want to make sure to clear all the wires and lines and whatnot. You don't want to pinch those. And it'll go through the two outside holes on the bracket because these are actually wider than the frame, so it'll overhang, and that's how you'll secure that. If you do have an in-bed hitch, the hole in the middle, you're going to center that on the bottom of the frame rail and eventually drill a hole up through there, and they give you a self-tapping screw to secure it. In our case, we have a B&W hitch, and this isn't going to be everyone's situation. It's just going to depend on if you do have an in-bed hitch and who makes it. But in our case, this tab is just barely interfering with our hitch. And so since we're not using this attachment point anyway, and it's not load bearing or anything, I'm going to modify it. I'm just going to trim this little part off. That way this will fit in there like it should, and we can get it secured. So I got our piece modified a little bit there, and now we can get this in place. So we'll work our bolt through the bracket. Sometimes it'll want to get kind of hung up in there. Just trying to get a few more threads to work with here. There you go. Get it on like that. Then where the bolt comes through, take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut. I'll just get this started. Hand tight for now. Lowered our jack a little bit just to close this gap some and get a little bit of weight on our spring assembly. And then essentially I just centered this from side to side. We're going to have these brackets, and the short side of the bracket is going to kind of sit up in there like that. All right. But you'll take, before you put this in, take one of the longer bolts, put on a flat washer, put it through. It's going to work up into place like that. I'll take another flat washer, then I unlock nut, get that started hand tight, and I'm going to do the same exact thing just on the front side of our spring assembly. What I'm going to do, just to keep this airbag, at least the bottom side of it where I want it, is just lightly snug these down in a 9/16 socket and wrench, and I'll do that for not only this one, but the one in front of it as well. Moving to the top bracket, towards the front, since we have that in-bed hitch, that middle hole, that's where we're going to use a drill bit to drill into the frame and use the provided self-tapping screw to secure this. Make sure it's centered in the frame and everything clears and whatnot. And this is kind of why I had to trim our little tab off here, because our hitch, the plate on the side here is going to interfere with it. And so that's what I did, and everything worked out pretty good. So being that it's so tight, what I'll do is get this drilled out. Once that hole is drilled, this is the self-tapping bolt that you're going to run up in through that bracket and in through the frame. Definitely helps if you put some type of lubricant on the threads when you're doing this. And what I found in the past, usually when you get this started, it's a 9/16 socket. You'll run it up, it'll go a few turns, and then essentially get real hard. When that happens, I'll back it out, run it up again, back it out, run it up, and usually each time you do that, it works its way up a little bit further and further and further. So usually about halfway, it'll kind of come to a point where it just threads in all the way easily. I feel like it's just the bolt cutting its own threads. So take your time when you're doing this, make sure you get it started straight and get it snugged down. The attachment point on the top bracket towards the back, we can snug this nut up now with the 9/16. And 90% of the time it's just going to spin because that bolt's just rotating inside of the frame. So you can always take, when I'm using, I just have a swivel and my 9/16 socket and a small extension. I'm going to drop that in through that oblong hole through the frame and get this on the head of the bolt, just prevent it from spinning while I'm tightening this down. Now that we have all the hardware snug, you want to make sure and come back with our torque wrench and completely tighten it down. With the driver's side all complete, the passenger side is going to be set up the exact same way. So if you haven't already, go ahead and get this one installed too. We're out our air lines, and you're going to have a big bundle here, and I already cut ours, but the big bundle will have these gold ends on each end. All right, so I usually straighten it all out and split it about in half, and then one piece I usually make about 2 feet or so longer. That'll have to make the longer run from the passenger side. And when you cut these, you want to avoid using a regular pair of snips because it'll kink it or kind of crimp it down, and then it'll probably leak. So you want to use a tool like this, or even a tubing cutter, which we carry. Or what I've done in the past, if you set this on a block of wood and take a sharp utility knife, push down, you can cut it that way. But what you're looking to do is have a good, clean, straight cut. So that's a pretty good example there. It's not kinked or, a bunch of burrs and stuff on it. And with it like that, we shouldn't run into any leaking issues. Take the air line, that's going to plug into the fitting on the top of the bag, and these are just push quick connect fittings. So you line up the hose with it and just push her right into place. You'll feel it kind of lock in, and that's really all there is to it. So I'll go ahead and get our airlines routed and then show you the path that I took to get to our mounting location. I got the driver's side routed here, and the hose just runs up like this. You want to avoid real sharp bends and hot and moving parts to your best of your ability. But that just runs along through here and comes down through here. It's where we're going to mount this up. And what I did is just took a little piece of metal, drilled a couple holes in it, and then use this factory Torx bit bolt here to secure it. So that's how I'm going to mount these up, but there's brackets available here at Etrailer you can use that kind of zip tie around your hitch. The instructions offer some ideas. I've put them, use these to replace the license plate bolts before, so you kind of get creative. But regardless, to secure these to the bracket, you put on a hex nut there. Get the rest of the hardware out here. We'll then have a star washer, so you put that on. And then you'll push it through the bracket or through your mounting location. Where that comes down, there's a rubber washer. Slide that up. A flat washer and a hex nut. I'll just tighten these up by hand if you want. You can always come back with a 1/2-inch socket and turn it by hand. You don't need to get carried away by any means. So that's that, and then you probably noticed this one. So I already did the passenger side, so that's what this is. And as far as how that's routed, essentially for the most part it took the same path as our driver's side airbag. So I just have it running up through the frame and up through here. And then this is it right here. All right, so there's a hole in this hat channel that I took the tubing and just pushed it through. And then I also took maybe 6 or 8 inches of some wire loom just to put it over our tubing, give it an extra layer of protection. I just pushed it all the way through. That's where it's going to come down over here on the passenger side. So when I have it drop down, the kit's going to give you this thermal sleeve here to protect it from heat. And being that this is the closest point to our exhaust, slid that tube over the airline, pushed it right into the fitting. With everything installed, we can fill up our bags between 40 and 60 psi. That way we can check for any leaks. To check for leaks, you can listen for them. It's pretty obvious if you hear air hissing out, you got a leak. But a lot of times it's not going to happen. You can take some soapy water and spray down all the fittings and connection points. Kind of give it a minute. And what you're looking for is for bubbles to continuously and rapidly be forming. If you see that, you know you got an air leak. And what you can do is let the air out of the system. If you got to tighten the fitting up a little bit, you can do that. Or if it's leaking where the hose is connected, you kind of push the hose in and pull out quickly, and that's how you disconnect it. Recut that hose clean, put it back in, and fill it with full air and try it again. So we're good here, and I checked the rest of our fittings, and we're in good shape. With that done, you can go ahead and reinstall your spare tire. I'm going to hold off on that because I'm going to be doing a compressor, and it just gives me more room to work down here. But with all that complete, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the airlift LoadLifter air helper springs for the rear axle on our 2016 Chevrolet Silverado 1500.